Hello, my name is Joseph Mazurek. I'm the instructor for the UXO HAZWOPER refresher. I've been a UXO technician for over 20 years, and during that time I've taken a lot of HAZWOPER refresher training. I'm also trained the trainer certified. My goal in making this course is to create a HAZWOPER refresher that's more applicable to what we do as UXO technicians. What we do is quite a bit different from other industries, so finally there's a HAZWOPER refresher that's applicable to UXO work. Here, very briefly, I want to sample three sections of the course. There's UXO history, there's a part about recognizing hazards besides the hazards related to finding ordnance, and finally there's a section about emergency response. So if you're ready, let's get started. History. How did the ordnance get there? Well, let's talk about that. Most UXO found in the United States is there as a result of military training. All ordnance types have dud rates. In other words, not every projectile fired down the barrel of a gun goes off like it's supposed to. The same is the case for bombs, missiles, rockets, and every other type of ordnance. The duds are commonly referred to as UXO and can be found wherever military training exercises have been conducted. Not all UXO sites are on government installations. In years past, a variety of lands were used, and some areas were government land previously, but are not anymore. My first UXO job was like that. It used to be a piece of property in California that belonged to the government, but then had been turned over to the city and was used for property development. And while most UXO found in the United States is from training, some are the remnants of military conflicts, things like the American Civil War, the Revolutionary War, and others. Recently, I found a cannonball. In previous decades, the military would often dispose of out-of-date ordnance by burying it or dumping it at sea. Programs like the U.S. Army's Operation Chase, which stands for Cut Holes and Sink 'em, were designed to dispose of chemical weapons at sea. Unfortunately, old rounds can come back and cause new problems when land is repurposed or when the maritime activities like dredging or commercial fishing disturb discarded ordnance. Many of the projects I've done recently have to do with dredging, and they drag up these old rounds. All right, let's talk about recognizing hazards. You might not work in a lava field like Duck, but wherever you're working, there's bound to be dangers. Let's talk about them. Starting with rough terrain and remote locations. If you're doing UXO work, you're bound to work in remote locations and on rough terrain, so concerns include adequate food and water. Water's the big one, but bring enough food to last the day. Most UXO workers aren't going out to lunch. A limited shelter. Sometimes there's an office trailer, sometimes there's a work truck, but other times there's just no shelter to be had. So in areas like that, you particularly have to be on the lookout for the weather. The possibility of injury and evacuation plans. If someone were to get hurt, let's say they twisted their ankle or had a nasty fall or potentially got hurt worse than that, how are you going to get an injured person out of a remote area? Limited communications is often an issue. Sometimes there's cell reception, but not always. So radios are often used to communicate with the safety officer, your SUXO, or other teams. And accessibility for emergency responders. So if emergency responders are needed, where are they going to meet you at? These things have to be accounted for and planned for, before projects begin. It goes on from there, but let's take a moment to look at emergency response. Emergency responses to UXO sites should consider factors associated with munitions. That includes emergency recognition and prevention, such as safe handling of UXO and considerations for possible unintentional detonations or exposure to chemical warfare agents. Safe distances and places of refuge. So you have your evacuation zone, where you're going to rendezvous at, and you need to stay upwind from smoke and chemical releases. Site control and security. Of course, you don't want people accessing a hazardous area, and the communication system needs to be reliable. Well, that's just a very small sample, but I hope it's given you an idea of what the course is about. Along the way, trainees will have the typical knowledge checks to make sure they're keeping up and absorbing the material, and when completed, they will get their certificate right away. That's what they're here for. They're here for the certificate. If you have any questions or want to contact me, send an email to info@uxohazwoper.com.